Welcome back to Twinhammer. Thomas here and excited to bring you into the very new Killzone of Tomb World. This is an extremely exciting Killzone. We're entering into a Necron Tomb World, and there are a lot of new and very exciting rules that expand upon the previous Gallo-Dark style terrain, bringing us a very new experience. Okay, so let's get into it. So, before we get into the rules of the Killzone, it's always nice to have a little bit of a lower backdrop. So, the Tomb Worlds revolve around the race of Necrons. Necrons are an ancient race of beings that were once organic beings called the Necron tier. But after an event, they were transferred all of their living souls into robotic bodies of living metal. They had a massive war between an ancient race called the Old Ones, which were kind of like the lizardmen in space, and the races they helped to create, namely the Aldari, the space elves. And this war was called the War in Heaven. Now, after a little bit of extra lore involving the Catan, which were star-like god beings that once took over the Necrons, and then the Necrons turned on them. They had a bit of a civil war. They were a little bit weakened, and after this long war in heaven, they feared that the Eldari could capitalize and bring about their extinction. So what they did was they decided to encapsulate themselves in these tomb worlds, entombing themselves and going into a deep sleep, so that they could slumber in status to be reawoken much later, when they predicted that after a long period of time, the Eldari would kind of rise and fall, and they wouldn't be that powerful anymore. Fast forward now to the 40K, our current time period, and they have been slumbering in this great sleep for 60 million years, and now we find ourselves in the timeline in which the Necrons are reawakening from these tomb worlds, finding the Eldari a dwindling race, nowhere close to their former power, and now the Necrons are bent on gaining dominance over the galaxy. So here we can see a few different images of what could be tomb worlds in which they are slumbering while their canoptic constructs, their scarabs, and lots of different robotic beings are kind of keeping their tomb world alive while they slumber, and here they are reawakening. Okay, and this is what fully realized Necron tomb world could look like there. Very cool image. Now, we're going to get into the Killzone. So, with the new box set, we now find ourselves able to dive and delve into the fascinating ancient tomb worlds full of slumbering Necrons and ancient power and technology. Many of these tomb worlds were hidden on worlds that were inhabited by other races during the Necron slumber, and as they reawoken, they tried to retake the worlds which they were slumbering on. So let's say Imperial had basically had a world there that they were living on. The Necrons would awake and be like, wait, we were here first. This is our world. And they try to take it over. Now, the reasons for various factions to send kill teams into these tomb worlds might be to discover ancient technology, defend their planet from a reawakened Necron legion, or to send dedicated teams in to sabotage and destroy the Necrons before they can reawaken, or as they're reawakening so that they don't take over. Now, when we get into the actual Killzone, we are going to be looking at a Killzone similar to the Gallo-Dark, where they use a 606mm by 703mm board, which, if we're thinking in inches, which the rest of the measurements are in, would be roughly 24 inches by 28 inches. And it's set up in a 7 by 6 grid system, which makes it a bit more equal in length than the 22 inches by 30 inch board sizes commonly used for kill teams, such as in Killzone Focus and Beta Decima. And each square is pretty much 3.95 inches. We could kind of round them to 4. So each of these squares on the board would be basically 4 inches squared. It is a two-dimensional, non-vertical kill zone, meaning that you can't climb the terrain as you can in other kill zones. You can't climb over the walls. It's meant to have an imaginary ceiling over the walls, simulating being deep within one of the levels of a Necron tomb. Now, looking at the walls, these are very cool walls. They've got a blend of almost ancient technology with a kind of stone taking over as well. So really cool mix of like technological and organic look to it. And we've got slumbering Necrons in the walls that are ready to be awakened, which is very cool. So a Tomb World wall terrain feature is heavy, and it's called its own category called wall terrain. Some of these walls include a hatchway, as we can see here, this door, or a breach point, as we can see over here. So we're going to get into those. And wall terrain, operatives cannot move through this wall terrain unless specified, such as in the Canoptic Circle. So pretty much usually in most cases, 90% of cases, you can't move through these walls. This takes precedence over all other rules. Visibility cannot be determined over or through wall terrain. Let's say you have a super tall model like the Tyranid, the Ravener Prime, which is super tall. It might actually be taller than these walls. We're just going to imagine that there's a ceiling there and it can't see over it. Okay. Other than to areas of the kill zone, such as the center of the kill zone or drop zones, distances cannot be measured over or through wall terrain. They must be measured around it using the shortest possible route. For the purposes of cover and obscured, only the corners and ends of wall terrain can intervene unless the active operative has passed it. Okay, so we're going to get into examples of how the wall terrain is used here. Okay, so here we can see that the usual measurements would be within 3 inches, but because there's the wall terrain in between them, you actually have to measure basically around the wall terrain, and now you have to count up basically all of these inches that are going in there. So it's quite a bit more than 3 inches, as we can see here, if you have to measure all the way around the wall. Okay, now let's take a look at cover. So usually, if you had a piece of terrain here, you could use this terrain for cover, but because it's a wall terrain and it's not the corner, it's actually just part of a straightaway passage here, we're just going to pretend like this doesn't exist. And the reason that the game's designers have put this rule in is so you can't just keep on kind of going up little nooks on the wall and kind of stay in cover. It forces a little bit more active engagement in these rooms. Okay, so unless it's a wall terrain, we're just going to ignore this part of the wall that's not just this flat piece here. Okay, we're going to ignore this little obelisk, and therefore see that line can go straight through it and you have full visibility. It's not intervening. Now, that being said, we're going to now look at what happens if it's on the corner. So here we could see actually it's part of this corner piece. So the corner piece actually does treat this now obelisk, stone obelisk, as being intervening. So this person is actually going to be in cover because, as we can see, drawing a line to this side of the base, it's clipping, so he's going to be in cover. Now, if we see a corner piece here, if the operative has actually cleared the edge of the corner piece, as we can see in this dotted line, then we again start to ignore this obelisk that is just cutting. Okay, so as long as your operatives, the point of the base of your operative has passed this horizontal line, it is now breaking the corner rule. Tomb World wall rules, we're going to go into it a little bit more here. We can see that this is a corner piece here. It's the end. So it's a wall end. So this is actually not a corner, but it's a wall end. So corner and wall ends share the same rules. They treat this obelisk, stone obelisk, as being legitimate cover. And we can see that operative B here is in cover. We are going to now look at hatchways, so we're going to get into this a little bit, but these doorways, these access points, you can see through the doorway in the orange here, but you can't see through the other parts of it. Okay, so this is open. This is where the door would be open. And this is obviously the side of the door. That's not a door. It's not an opening. So that counts as cover. And because the cover line is intervening over this piece of heavy terrain and operative B is more than an inch away, they would be obscured. Okay, now we're going to get into hatchways, or you could think of them as the doors. A hatchway has two statuses, closed and open. It has two parts, an access point and a hatch. Okay, so the access point is kind of what we would call an open when the door is opened, and closed we'd call it a hatch. Okay, so their terrain types depend on the hatchway status. Operatives can perform the operate hatch mission action to change its status, which is one action point to basically open or close the door. And hatchways always begin the battle closed. One thing to keep in mind with the Tomb World set is that you have, I believe, 5 hatchways. 3 of them are going to be doors, and 2 of them are going to be energy fields, this kind of green glow. Usually it's going to be painted as. And we're just thinking of this energy field simply as a door. Okay, so it's nothing more than the same as this solid door. It's just an aesthetic change that makes it look like a cool energy field door instead. So although you could kind of see through it, it's meant to be completely opaque. Like you're not actually meant to see through this. We've just got this kind of energy field effect. Okay. So you can open and close doors in this kill zone, gaining you access to different rooms on the map, or you could try to reclose them to prevent your opponent from gaining access so that they would have to spend an action point to open them again. So hatchways doors can be opened and they can be closed. Okay. You have to have them within your control range to open and close them. Okay, so we can see here the operate hatch action. So you would need to have a model within 1 inch of this doorway, and you'd have to spend, so control range is 1 inch. You'd have to spend one of your actions points to basically open this. Okay, then you can't perform this action if you're in control range of an enemy operative, if that hatchway is open and its access point is within an enemy operative's control range. So if you have an enemy operative on the other side, you can't just close the door on them. Okay, it's simulating that they're on the other side, preventing you from closing the door. Okay. And again, a reminder, this energy field here is simply a door. You can't see it when closed. Okay, so while a hatchway is open, its hatch must be removed from the kill zone. So you would just pop out this energy field or the door. Its access point is now accessible and insignificant. So what that means is that this small lip down here doesn't provide any cover. So that's what insignificant means. Accessible means when you move through this door, you lose an inch from your movement. So if you had 6 inches to move through the door, you would go down to only 5-inch move. Okay. And an important thing to note is that you can perform this action during the dash or reposition action, and any remaining move distance can be used after it does so. So as you're moving through this door, you can spend the action point and kind of just move straight through it while opening the door. You don't have to stop to open the door. It doesn't stop your movement. You can just kind of basically be running through it and open it at the same time. Okay, so exposed means that, again, this little lip doesn't provide cover and it basically doesn't interact. It's now considered one big opening. Okay, so if you wanted to have cover, you'd have to be on the other side of this orange line. Okay, so you'd have to be fully covered on these sides of the door. So you could still be here and be in cover, but you can't be right in the middle. If you're right in the middle, you will just be able to get shot. All right, now getting into a new feature of the Tomb World sets, and that is breach points. So there's specific spots in the kill zone. They are built into the actual terrain set, and these are points where you can spend actions to break the wall open. And there's a few places, so we have 2 pieces, A1, that have a breachable spot right here. So we have these kind of obelisk-shaped designs on the walls. You're going to look for, there's 2 sets of 3. You're going to look for the set of 3 that's on the left side of your main center obelisk, glowing obelisk here. And the center and right out of this set of 3 are where you can break through. Okay, and then on the other side, you actually don't, if you're looking from the other side, you don't have this on this. So you're going to have to look for these because the other side doesn't really give you any indication. If we are looking at this piece B2, which is a smaller piece, if you look for scarabs that are on the wall, the scarabs are indicating that they're trying to repair a piece of broken wall, and that's where you can break through. Okay, so cool little detail where they add the scarabs there for you to be able to kind of notice. These things are important because if you don't take note of this, they are extremely hard. It's a really well-designed set. You can't tell that the wall is breakable. It will just look like a regular wall, which is a very cool feature, but it can make it very hard to see where you can break through. So you're going to have to look for these small details just to be able to break through. Also, a tip would be if you're building this set, you do want to mark just above here. Try to mark visually so from a top-down view, you can easily see where you can break through. It's going to save you a lot of time being confused at where you can break through. Okay, so breach points. A breach point has 2 statuses, closed and open. it has two parts, an access point and a breach wall, and their terrain types depend upon the breach point status. Okay, so they're called a breach wall when they're not broken, and they're called an access point when they are broken. So they begin obviously with the wall intact, so they're basically breach points begin closed. And to open a breach point, operatives can perform the breach mission action, at which point it cannot be closed again. So you can't scramble and try to put the pieces of the broken wall back together to reclose it. Once you break through the wall, it remains open for the rest of the game. So when it is an access point, it is considered heavy and wall. So when it is unbroken, it is just simply a wall terrain as we saw earlier. So to breach this specific spot in the wall, you need to spend an action called breach. And basically, this one, instead of being one for open the hatchway action, it's actually 2 AP. So it's harder to break through a wall than it is to open a door, which kind of makes sense. So we open a closed breach point that's access point is within the operative's control range. Okay, so you're going to need to kind of be right at that spot within 1 inch to break it. And the interesting thing with breaking a wall is that any operative that has the breach marker, Grenadier, or Mine on its data card, and we can see here some examples. The Breakaway Fighter has the breach marker, Assault Grenadier has Grenadier, and Kazrakan Demo Trooper has Mine on their data cards. They can basically spend 1 less AP to break the wall, which means that they're kind of operatives that are designed to be good at breaking walls. So they can basically break it for 1 AP instead of 2 AP. Also, if you have an operative that has the Piercing 2, such as the Starstorm Duelist from the Corsairs, they can spend 1 less AP to a minimum of 1 AP to break the wall as well. So they can use their kind of melta weapons, their very powerful kind of energy weapons to break the wall a little bit more easily, but they can't do so during an activation or counteraction, which would perform the charge or shoot action. Okay, so any of these fighters which have an easier time cannot use this ability to get 1 less AP if they've performed the charge or shoot action. Now, an interesting thing is the Kroot Heavy Gunner Dvorgate Skinner has Piercing 2, but it also has Torrent 2. And there's a restriction that Piercing 2 or Piercing 2 crits weapon rules that usually have an easier time breaking wall. If you have Blaster Torrent, you can't use this rule. For obvious reasons, if you're using a thing that can just like basically do a huge blast and kill yourself, you wouldn't want to use that to break a wall. So if you have Blaster Torrent on your Piercing 2 or Piercing 2 weapon, you cannot break the wall for 1 less AP. So we're going to roll 1d6 separately for each operative. That's when you break a wall. If there are any enemy operatives on the other side of that wall you're breaking that are within control range of the breakpoint, they might get damaged from the breaking wall and they might get stunned from the breaking wall. So on a 4+, you're basically going to roll for each operative a d6 that's on the other side of that wall. On a 4+, you subtract 1 from that operative's APL stat until the end of its next activation, and you inflict damage on it equal to the dice result halved, rounding up. Then an operative cannot perform this action while in control range of an enemy operative or if that breach point is open. While a breach point is open, its breach wall must be removed from the kill zone. Okay, so you remove that piece that you're breaking, not putting it back. Its access point is accessible and insignificant. Its access point is also exposed terrain. This means that the walls either side of it must be used for cover and obscuring instead. Okay, so that little lip, as we saw earlier with the doors, this little lip doesn't count for cover. So you need to be on either side of the orange part here to get cover. Accessible means that when you're moving through it, you lose an inch of movement. And insignificant means that you're not counting this for any purposes of visibility or anything here. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that access point for doors and breach points look the same on both maps. So A1 and B2 are breach points, as we can see here. This is actually a breach point, and B2 here, either side of these wall ends, are breach points. A3, A4, and B3 are hatchways. So if we see here, we have this gray one is actually a hatchway, and then this is a breach point over here, A1. If we go to A4, that's a hatchway. So there's really no difference if you're looking at the map to set up the board. There's no difference between a breach point and a hatchway in terms of like the way it looks on the map. So you're going to just have to keep in mind which pieces are which. And again, another tip is to label them on top so that you can have an easier time of it. Okay, now getting into an interesting thing with the access points. So if you are touching an access point, so it could be the breach point that you blew up, or it could be a doorway, you can fight anyone within 2 inches of that open hatchway or breach point. Now, the stipulation is your operative's base has to be touching the open hatchway, and then your opponent's model has to be within 2 inches of the access point. The reason this rule is in the game is that if you set up, as we can see here in the picture, there's 2 Vespids here that are kind of preventing this model from moving into the next room. So in order to, and you can't place this model, there's no room to place this model to charge these 2. So they've designed this rule so that in order to get around the little thing of not being able to place your model to charge, if the distances doesn't quite line up, they've just allowed you to fight them as if you're just kind of like fighting them around this doorway. So you can just, it's treated as a fight action. You can perform this action while in control range of an enemy operative, or it's if its base isn't touching the access point of an open hatchway / breach point. Okay, so the interesting thing is if they are within 1 inch of you, you'd have to charge them instead. So it's a little bit different than a charge and fight. It's actually just a fight action separate from a charge. And the interesting thing with this is that because it's not a charge, you technically don't have to do it on engage, because fighting can be done on conceal. Charging has to be done on engage, but fighting can be done from conceal. So this one, you can kind of move dash an operative. Let's say you had enough APL, you could move the operative up to the door, open it on conceal, and just do a fight action, which is an interesting stipulation. Okay, then the fight would kind of take place as normal, and they're treated as being within your control range. So any rules that are like give you bonuses when you're in control range would trigger with this. But the main difference is it's not a charge and fight, it's kind of just a move and fight. So in Tomb World, with the addition of breach points, we have additional access points that can be used to hatchway fight. It's very important to keep in mind where the breach points are and how close your models are to them. So let's say you had a couple models on the other side of a breakable door. Someone comes, breaks the thing. They could still hatchway fight you if you're within 2 inches. You don't have to be wholly within 2 inches, just within 2 inches. So you could have a model that's like decently far away from that break point. And then if your model, if the enemy model comes with touching that break point, they can fight you within 2 inches. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, so these are both treated as access points to be hatchway fightable, the break point and the access point. Now, getting into teleport pads. Okay, so we have this new really cool feature in this kill zone called the teleport. They allow operatives to teleport from one spot in the kill zone to the other. Okay, we're dealing with very cool Necron technology here. If your faction doesn't have access to teleporting before, it does now, because you can use these just as easily as the Necrons can. So a teleport pad, as we can see here, there's 2 of them in each kill zone. A teleport pad is exposed in significant and vantage terrain. And exposed means that it doesn't provide any cover. So as we can see this model here, if you were drawing a line of sight to it from the other side, it wouldn't provide any cover. Insignificant, that means doesn't really require any additional movement to traverse. It's a terrain thing, but you don't have to really worry about it. You could just move over it, no problem. Vantage means it does not count as the kill zone floor. So any rules revolving around the kill zone floor don't count for this particular piece of terrain if your model's on it. Okay, now, interesting thing with teleporting is from the start of the second turning point, which is a very important stipulation, you can't do this on the first turning point. So you can't use it as like a first turn quick strike, alpha strike on your opponent. It can only be done from the second turning point onward. Whenever a friendly operative on a teleport pad performs the charge, fallback, or reposition action, you can teleport it. If you do, don't move it. Instead, remove it from the kill zone and set it back up on the other teleport pad. It still must fulfill all other requirements of that action, otherwise it cannot teleport. If it's the charge action, for example, the operative must finish that action within control range of an enemy operative. Okay, so you would basically use an action while standing on one teleport pad to teleport to the other one. Now, as far as I'm aware, it basically has to use its full movement to teleport. So you can't just count it as like a 0 inches movement and then move like your full 6 inches once you get to the other teleport side. We are going to basically, it's using its full like 6-inch movement to just basically teleport instead. So that means that you could still probably dash after doing the teleport, or you can dash onto the teleport pad and then use your reposition once you're there. So that is a way of getting onto the teleport pad and then doing it. And let's just keep in mind that if you're trying to charge, you can't dash and then charge as well. And if you wanted to move after using a reposition on a teleport, you could only dash from there. Okay, rules of teleportation. An operative cannot be both on the pad and the kill zone floor at the same time. So as we can see here, the base is kind of touching the floor and touching the pad. That's a no-no. You have to just be fully on the pad. Another rule of teleportation is an operative does not need to be in the center of the teleport pad to begin the teleport when it arrives at the other pad. Its base simply needs to rest on it, and that implies that it can be overhanging. Nothing says the operative has to be fully on the teleport pad. Nothing says it has to be in the center of the teleport pad. So we're basically using some inference to make this rule and show that you can kind of don't have to be fully, as long as you're on it, you can use the teleportation. Now, rules of teleportation. Another one is only one operative can ever be on it at once, even if a charge was declared. Even if both models' bases could fit on the teleport pad, the rules designers have just made it so, okay, let's simplify it. Only one can be on the pad at one time. Okay, so if you wanted to charge this model on the pad, your model would have to be on the ground, not on the pad, but within 1 inch of the enemy model on the pad. And here we can see an example of that. Let's say this Canoptic Warrior has just basically used the charge action to teleport onto this other pad. If it wanted to charge this Breakable, which might not be a great idea, but let's just say this as an example, you'd have to be within control range if you use the charge. Now, nothing says you can't use a reposition and shoot this instead, but you can, if you wanted to charge, you would still have to make sure you're within control range of an operative on the other side. If another operative is on the other teleport pad when an operative teleports, swap them around. If it's an enemy operative, its controlling player sets it up. So if there's 2 teleport pads, if an enemy operative has one on the other, they basically just get swapped with your model. So keep that in mind. If you're prepping a model to teleport, your opponent can just teleport their model first, and then all of a sudden your model ends up on the other one, maybe to be shot by the opponent. So that's something very interesting. Okay, so the sarcophagus and debris. These are 5 pieces of light terrain that look like heavy terrain, but are light terrain. And these are really cool little stone pieces and a Necron sarcophagus that are set up very specifically on each map in very specific places. So as we can see, they're all in the C category here. And one thing to keep in mind is that these shapes don't always line up perfectly as squares. So you can see they're not perfectly square, but on the map that they will show up in a rectangular square. So just keep in mind which piece is which. And again, labeling these will save you a lot of time trying to stipulate which piece is which and having to consult the map legend 4 times each time. So really suggest labeling all of these pieces. Close quarters tomb world. So there are rules for close quarters, and here we have condensed environments. So weapons with the blast torrent and or devastating a certain amount of inches, so devastating with a distance requirement. Weapon rule also have the lethal 5, so it means that you can also retain crits from a 5 result of 5 on the dice, not just 6. That's what lethal 5 means. Since the kill zone is considered a closed area with an imaginary roof, things that explode or flame type weapons are considered more lethal in this environment. So they bounce around, and they basically, the blast is condensed or the flame is condensed, so it's going to be a little more lethal than normal. Okay, so now we have guard. This action is available on any close quarters kill zone, such as Gallowdark and Tomb World. So guard is a powerful action that allows an operative to attack later at the opportune moment. It can change the dynamic of the game, so try to avoid enemy operatives on guard or consider how to best utilize it yourself. Use the token above to indicate any operatives that are on guard. Guard is, you can put your operative on guard. It counts as a shoot action. Once during each enemy operative's activation, after that enemy operative performs an action, you can interrupt that activation and select one friendly operative on guard to perform the fight or shoot action for free, including actions that are treated as such, for example, Hatchway fight. So this is kind of an interrupt action. You're basically putting your operative on guard so that when they have an opportunity to shoot or fight the enemy, they do so interrupting. The key part is interrupting your opponent's activation. And this is kind of a reactionary action that isn't that common in Kill Team. Usually you can't really interrupt. There's a few interrupt actions unique throughout Kill Team, but this is kind of a universal interrupt that everyone has access to in the close quarters kill zones. And you would determine the target as normal for these actions, so it would have to be someone you're able to shoot or fight in all of the other circumstances as well. So it has to be someone you can that would be a valid target. But the key thing is, if you're interrupting an opponent's activation, you don't necessarily have to then shoot the enemy operative that you're interrupting. You can interrupt enemy operatives' activation that's activating across the board, but then you could use guard to shoot an enemy operative that's right in front of your operative, for example, that's maybe expended and already gone. So you don't have to target the operative that you've interrupted. So they would spend an action, they would perform an action, the enemy operative, then you would trigger your guard after that action. So let's say they reposition. As soon as they're done repositioning, you interrupt and say, I'm going on guard, I will now shoot you. Now, the interesting thing is you cannot go on guard if you have a conceal order. Also, it is treated as a shoot action, so you can't shoot and then go on guard unless you have an operative that can shoot twice. So that's a stipulation to keep in mind. Even if your operative has silent, which usually allows it to shoot on conceal, it still can't do guard while it has a conceal order. Okay, so this is kind of, you can think of it as your operative is standing up with their gun locked and loaded, ready to shoot anyone in. They're not really hiding behind something. So we can see here that if your operative performs an action, moves, or setup after going on guard, get rid of the guard. So you don't want to guard first and then move, because then that just gets rid of your guard. You would want to move, let's say if you're a Marine, you can move, dash, and then go on guard, getting into a room. That's perfectly good. Its order is changed. So if you have anything that can change your order after your activation, let's say you have a ploy that can turn you back to conceal, then you're no longer on guard. So you would think, oh, maybe I'll just move, dash, go on guard, and then I'll trigger my ploy to go back on conceal. Once you go onto conceal, your guard is gone. And then the big key thing here is guard doesn't last. It doesn't continue into the next turning point. At the end of the turning point, your guard goes away. So if you have an operative and you've moved them into a room to go on guard, and then your opponent doesn't put any operative in there for you to shoot, as soon as the turn ends, now your operative is standing there, no longer on guard, and is on engage, so typically will be an easy target. Keep that in mind, that if your opponent does not trigger, if your opponent doesn't give you anyone to shoot, then you can just kind of be left there on engage. So you want to use this at an opportune moment. Once you have guarded, you cannot counteract during the turning point. This is a stipulation to, it's kind of like it almost acts as a little bit of a counteract. So if you're planning on counteracting, yeah, you can't do it if you go on guard. Okay, now, one really, really key thing that I wanted to mention here is that passing with a model does not trigger guard as currently in the rules of Kill Team in this edition. There's no pass action. Passing just simply, you relinquish your actions. It's not mentioned. The rules designers really do need to address this, but passing is just simply something you can do with an operative. So if you have an enemy on guard and they can shoot one of your models, and let's say you have only one operative left to activate, you can simply pass with that operative and it will not trigger your opponent's guard because you're not performing any actions. This currently, rules as written, is a thing, so very important to keep in mind. Passing does not trigger guard as you are not performing an action, and guard needs to basically interrupt after an action is performed. Now, one interesting thing with guard is that your operative can perform the shoot action while within control range of an enemy operative, and this takes precedence over the normal shoot action conditions. This is known as a point-blank shot. So basically, if your operative's on guard and your opponent charges you, you can still shoot them. However, that shot, because you're getting rushed down, your hit stat is reduced by 1. So let's say you're hitting on 4s normally, you're going to now be hitting on 5s. If you're hitting on 3s, you're now going to be hitting your opponent on 4s. And so let's say your opponent charges you, you use the point blank shot and you shoot your opponent. They make their saves, you don't kill them. All of a sudden now, until the end of the interrupted enemy's operative's activation, your operative cannot retaliate. So if they start fighting you, you can't retaliate. They just get free hits on you, the way this is written. So something to keep in mind, if you do take that point blank shot, you can't even roll any dice in the fight. Okay, so that brings us to guard, which is a very unique action. Some operatives in the game have written now in this edition that they can guard outside of the close quarters. So Deathwatch have it, Phobos currently have it with the marksman. So some operatives can do this outside of close quarters, something to keep in mind, but most can't. Even the death marks from Hyrotech also have this as well. For a CP, they can go on guard in open or kill, like let's say, for example, Killzone Focus. So something to keep in mind. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the presentation. Hope that this cleared up a lot of things for Killzone Tomb World. It's a very exciting time. It feels like they expanded upon Gallo Dark and gave us a lot more to work with. And it looks like a very unique and interesting opportunity to engage with a new Killzone. So very excited. And just a reminder, if you want to pick up Killzone Tomb World or anything hobby or kill team, you can go to Top Shelf. Our friends at Top Shelf will take care of you extremely well, and they will have everything you need there, from kill teams to paints to equipment packs to card packs. They have you covered. Okay, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you very soon. All right, have a great rest of your day.